Imagine this. You're fighting a legal case for 12 years. Your savings are gone, your business collapsed, your children grew up watching court dates become family events, and one morning, your lawyer calls you and says, "Sir, next hearing 6 months later." Not because the constitution failed, not because the law was unclear, but because there simply weren't enough judges. Now here's the shocking part. This Honorable Supreme Court of India, of a country with 1.4 billion people, had just 34 judges, including the Chief Justice of India until now. 34 for an entire civilization-sized democracy. And that is why, quietly, almost invisibly, the Honorable President of India has now promulgated an ordinance increasing the sanctioned strength of Supreme Court judges from 33 to 37, excluding the Chief Justice of India, taking the total strength of Honorable Supreme Court to 38. Now sounds technical, sounds boring, but this decision tells you something massive about India's future, because this is not just about the judges, it is about whether India can survive its own scale or not. Whether democracy can function when justice itself is overloaded, overburdened, and whether adding 4 more judges can actually fix a system buried under millions of pending cases or not. Or whether this is like adding 4 buckets to stop a flood. See, most people only remember the Supreme Court during dramatic moments in our country, whether it be Article 370, whether it be electoral bonds, free speech, elections, or any other events. But the real Supreme Court of India is not the television drama, it is the paperwork. Mountains of paperwork. As of 2026, more than 93,000 cases are pending in Supreme Court alone, and across India's entire judiciary, more than 5 crore pending cases. Think about that number very carefully. 5 crore. This means millions of Indians are trapped in suspended reality. Property disputes, bail pleas, business conflicts, divorce cases, land acquisition fights, government appeals. For millions of people, justice in India is not denied dramatically. It is denied slowly, silently, and procedurally. And delays are not just emotional problems. They become economic problems. If contracts are not enforced quickly, businesses they hesitate to invest. If commercial disputes drag for years, startups bleed money. If criminal trials takes decades, public trust collapses. And this is why economists, investors, and even global institutions watch judicial efficiency very closely. Because courts are not just moral institutions, they're economic infrastructure. A highway helps goods move. A court helps trust move. And here's where the story becomes interesting, because India's Supreme Court was never designed for this scale. When the Constitution came into force in 1950, Article 124 envisioned a Supreme Court with the Chief Justice and up to 7 other judges. That was the imagination of a newly independent India. Back then, India's population was around 36 crores. No internet, no giant regulatory state, no explosion of litigation, no social media free speech battles, no GST disputes, no data privacy concerns, no environmental mega cases. The court was tiny because the republic itself was tiny. But then India changed faster than its own institutions, and slowly, over decades, Parliament kept increasing the strength of Supreme Court from 8 judges to 11, then to 14, then to 18, then 26, then 31, and then 34 in 2019, and now 38, including the Chief Justice of India. Notice something strange here. India became one of the world's largest economies, one of the world's largest democracies, one of the world's most legally complex societies, but its judicial capacity expanded much slower than the country itself, and that created a structural crisis. Because every success of India creates more litigation. More businesses means more commercial disputes. More regulations means more constitutional challenges, and more awareness means more citizens approaching courts. More governance means more conflict between citizens and state, and in a weird way, litigation is also a proof of democratic participation. People go to court because they still believe the system matters. But then came the breaking point. The Supreme Court started drowning. Not metaphorically, operationally. Benches were overloaded. Judges were hearing impossible number of matters daily, and lawyers getting even seconds instead of minutes. Important constitutional questions waiting for years. And here's a fact most people do not know. India's Supreme Court is unusually over-centralized. In many countries, Supreme Courts hear only the most important constitutional matters. But in India, Supreme Court hears everything from constitutional crisis to routine special leave petitions. Every year, tens of thousands of appeals reach the apex court. This is why the court became both powerful and exhausted at the same period of time. Now enter 2026. The Union Cabinet approves a proposal to increase the sanction strength of 4 judges. And then because the parliament was not in session, the president promulgates the Supreme Court number of Judges Amendment Ordinance under Article 123 of Indian Constitution. And this part is important. An ordinance is basically temporary lawmaking power. The executive can act immediately when parliament is not sitting and urgent action is required, which itself tells you the government believes judicial pendency has become urgent enough for immediate intervention in our country. But now comes the real question. Will 4 more judges change anything? And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because adding judges sounds like reform. But many legal experts argue India's crisis is much deeper than the headcount. Think about it. If the pipeline below is broken, making the tank bigger only helps temporarily. The real explosion of pendency is happening in the lower courts and the higher courts, not just the Supreme Court of India. Vacancies remain high across the judicial system. See, infrastructure is weak, digital systems are uneven, judges are overworked, and procedural delays are endless. So critics ask, are we treating symptoms instead of the disease? And there's another layer people rarely discuss. The Supreme Court's size itself changes the nature of justice. More judges means more benches. More benches means more judgments. More judgments can also mean more contradictory precedents, which creates confusion for lower courts. In fact, some legal scholars have argued that India's Supreme Court is already one of the largest apex court in the world. So the debate is not simply more judges good, fewer judges bad. The real debate is deeper. What should the Supreme Court even be? A constitutional court or the final appeal court for almost everything? Because right now, it is trying to be both. And that dual role is exhausting the institution altogether. Now there's another fascinating angle here, representation. Whenever new judicial appointments happen, the conversation around diversity returns. Women judges, judges from marginalized communities, regional balance, professional backgrounds. Because courts do not just interpret society, they also reflect society. And India's higher judiciary has long faced criticism over representation gaps. That debate will intensify again as new appointments happen for these additional seats. But beyond politics and legal theory, there's a bigger national story unfolding. India is trying to become a developed economy, a manufacturing hub, a trusted investment destination, a global power. But none of that works without fast and predictable justice. You cannot build trillion-dollar economies on decade-long disputes. Even something as simple as land acquisition for infrastructure projects can get stuck for years in litigation. Foreign investors, they study judicial efficiency before investing also, which is why domestic businesses, they factor long delays into their own costs. Startups fear compliances battles. Ordinary citizens lose faith, and once trust in justice weakens, democracy itself starts weakening silently. That is the real stake here. Not just 4 judges, institutional capacity is the real stake. Because India's biggest challenge in the 21st century, it's not ambition, it is execution. We dream at the scale of a superpower, but our institutions are still catching up to scale of our population. And the judiciary is perhaps the clearest example of that mismatch. Now here's the line I think you should remember from this entire story. A nation does not collapse only when justice becomes unfair. Sometimes a nation starts weakening when justice becomes too slow. That is real warning hidden inside the ordinance. The government is not expanding the Supreme Court because everything is fine. It is expanding it because pressure has reached dangerous levels. And yet, despite all the criticism, this move still matters. Because institutional paralysis is worse than imperfect reform. 4 judges alone will not solve India's judicial crisis, but refusing to expand capacity while pendency explodes would have been even worse. So this ordinance is both the solution and a confession. A solution because the burden is real. A confession because the backlog has become impossible to ignore. And now comes the uncomfortable final question. If the Supreme Court of India needed expansion, despite already being one of the world's largest apex courts, then maybe the real issue is not the number of judges at the top. Maybe the real issue is whether India's entire justice system was ever designed for 1.4 billion people in the first place or not. Think on it. Let me know the answer in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read your comments. All the very best. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.